Thank you everyone for coming. We'll get started since it's 11:30. I just want to do a brief introduction. This is our fourth Lunch and Learn. We started this last year. We did our first Lunch and Learn with Will Delurba. We learned about trees and what it is to be an arborist. Our second one was with Vince Murphy. We learned about his bird watching. He showed us some of his pictures that he takes out on the beach with the birds. And our most recent one was with David Sharp, who's here too, I think, as well. And, there you are. And we learned about July 4th and what it takes to prepare for the fireworks for 4th of July. So now we're welcoming Roberto, who's our public health director, to talk about infectious disease and most recently the coronavirus. So thank you for coming.
All right, thank you everyone for coming. Obviously, this is a crash course on infectious diseases. It's not just the coronavirus. We use the coronavirus to get you into the room, but I'm sorry to disappoint you that I have you as a captive audience. So I'm going to take advantage of having you guys here to talk about the things that we don't normally get to talk about. We actually have people's ear now. The only time in my 5 years that everyone's actually listened to what I have to say. So I'm going to take advantage of it. So first off, what is an infectious disease? You will hear a lot of words, you hear a lot of commentary about diseases out there. The real answer is, what is it? Just the definition. Anything that is a virus, a bacteria, a microorganism that causes a disease. We call those pathogens. That sort of thing, when I say any other microorganism, fungus cannot cause diseases, and they can be infectious. You can pass that. You'll hear things like, you may have heard things like thrush. The thrush is a candida fungus. That is an infectious disease. Why do we even care? Well, that's because it can strike at any time, anywhere, without warning, to anyone who is susceptible to it. When I mean what is susceptible is people who are able to get it. So why are vaccines so important? Because when you get that vaccine, it builds up an immunity in your body. You are no longer part of the susceptible population. When people don't get vaccines, they are still susceptible to those diseases. When you get a vaccine, you're not only protecting yourself, but you're protecting the people around you. So you reach something called herd immunity. So what happens is, we'll say, Bob and Jim and Amanda cannot get the vaccine because of immunocompromised issues. They just react poorly to the vaccine. We have to rely on the rest of you, every other person in this room, to get vaccinated because we need to protect them as well. It's not just you who you're protecting. You're protecting the other people around you. And to reach herd immunity, you need to have about 75% of a population that is susceptible vaccinated. So that in theory, that if 4 of you are in a room, 3 of you have the vaccine. So that other person won't be getting it. So that's really the main reason why we should care. Up here, you'll see 2 pictures of types of infectious diseases. The top right one is the novel coronavirus. That is the virus that's out today. That's the one that we're all meeting about. That's the one we're all talking about. That's the one you're hearing in the news. The one underneath it is a bacteria. They look a lot the same. The difference is the one on the top is actually about 1,000 times smaller than the one on the bottom. The one on the bottom is a Neisseria bacteria. I picked this one mainly because it looked cool, not because it is gonorrhea. So how do we get it? How do you get infectious diseases? Well, in the United States, these are the most common ways to get bacteria. I know I'm blocking some of you here, if you're okay. The most common is at the top, the least common is at the bottom. The most common type of infectious disease in the United States, sexually transmitted diseases. Or we now call them sexually transmitted infections, STIs. That is chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, herpes simplex, all sorts of things. I picked those 3 because they're bacteria. The fecal-oral route, that's how you end up getting things like Campy, Salmonella, E. coli. When you hear about most food outbreaks, that is a fecal-oral route. And it is as disgusting as it sounds. The only way for you to get this is for a fecal matter, AKA poop, gets into your oral pathway. Somehow it enters your mouth. 99 times out of 100, you're going to be okay. It's a bacteria your body already has. You have more bacterial cells in your body than you have actual cells that make up your body. You're more bacteria than you are yourself sometimes. So it is not, and most of the time, it is not bad. Every once in a while, you hear about outbreaks, you hear about salmonella. Where does salmonella come from? The inside of the digestive tract of a bird. Eggs, when an egg gets hatched, has a natural slime layer that is made by salmonella. If you buy them straight from a farm, make sure you wash your eggs because they have salmonella protecting it. If you buy them out at Stop and Shop, that's why they're in the refrigerator because they've been washed. They've been washed with a bleach solution to kill off the salmonella. But as a result, the egg is now in danger of being infected, and it can pass that to you. Vector-borne, everyone knows about it here on the island, Lyme disease. Vector-borne disease means it gets spread to you by bugs. Blood-borne pathogens, anything that gets brought to you through exposure to blood. Unfortunately, wastewater, most of the things that people hear of is in the wastewater as well. That's why we require vaccinations for hepatitis A, hepatitis B, hepatitis C. All of these are blood-borne pathogens. You can get them through intravenous use, as well as, I have HIV up there on purpose because HIV can be transferred also as a sexually transmitted disease. Just because it's on here as one of these examples doesn't mean it can't be passed by another way. And then what we're dealing with today, airborne. Airborne diseases are the least common transmission you see in the United States today. However, it's the one you hear about the most. You hear about measles, you hear about SARS, you hear about the current coronavirus that's out there. These are all airborne illnesses. There's the true airborne, like measles, where a person sneezes, it stays in the air for about 2 hours because it's so light. And then there's droplet airborne. A person sneezes, it drops out of the air. Why is all of this really important? Well, a long time ago, this guy, I don't know if any of you know who he is, because I haven't seen a $100 bill in a while. He mentioned how an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. What does that mean? He was saying it as fire prevention. Fire was perhaps one of the biggest killers in Philadelphia at the time. Now, hundreds of years later, we've adopted it for public health. Sorry, Bob, we stole it from fire. But what really is important about it is what you do now to prevent yourself from getting an infection will be huge later. Prevention is key. Prevention starts with you, not me. This is about personal responsibility as well. If I come knocking at your door, it's not a good day for you. Because once the health department has to respond to something like this, it means either you already have it or you're doing something wrong that got me there. Prevention is the most important part of any disease outbreak, any sort of infectious disease, any sort of chronic disease. I see some of you guys are eating salads here. That is an important part of preventing obesity. Obesity starts causing liver disease, liver damages, diabetes, things like that. Prevention is key. That's what the ounce of prevention means. Not just that you have to eat only 6 ounces of salad for lunch. So where is the levels of prevention? So there's 3 different levels. You'll hear occasionally things being called like primordial prevention. There's 2 schools of thought of that. Primordial prevention is things that somebody who is automatically naturally immune to the infection of something. You have no control over that, so that doesn't count. 3 levels of prevention. Primary, stop the disease before it happens. Once again, like I said, prevention is the most important part. What is the most important part of prevention? Washing your hands. Hand washing, the simple power of hand washing and you're going to hear me say this multiple times, is the first and foremost biggest impact public health intervention has ever had on infectious diseases. Once doctors started washing their hands before surgeries, post-surgical deaths dropped by almost 60%. That's how important hand washing is. Secondary prevention. Get screened for it. Everything from nasal swabs at the hospital to, and you'll hear sputum samples every once in a while. It's also important in chronic disease. Getting screened, you get your lung biopsies to make sure you don't have lung cancer. You get skin, what are those things? Moles removed. Bilingual. You get moles removed and they get checked for melanoma. That is secondary prevention as well. And then tertiary prevention, if a person has it, if a person is contagious, self-isolation, quarantine, that is an important part. You have to interrupt the chain of transmission. I lock myself in my own room so that I don't get Bob sick. That's why we have that. That's what tertiary prevention is. And if there is an antiviral, if it's a bacterial disease, if you have an antibiotic, that is also tertiary prevention. You're preventing the continuation of the disease. Quick, does an antibiotic work on a virus?
No.
No. Do not go to your doctor and ask for an antibiotic. If they're going to give you an antibiotic, you'll more likely end up with diarrhea than you are not going to get corona. Because like I said, those bacteria that are in your body are incredibly important. You take an antibiotic when you're not sick, you're more likely to kill off the good bacteria that's in your body than the bad bacteria. So, the part that everyone's been waiting for. What are we going to talk about today? That is, but first, before we move to what everyone wants, what does SARS, common cold, MERS, and COVID-19 all have in common? And here's a hint. This is NCOV. That's the common cold, that's SARS, and that's MERS. They all look very similar, don't they?
Same basic bacteria.
They're all coronaviruses.
They're all the types of coronaviruses. There are hundreds of different types of coronaviruses out there. All it means when you hear a type of coronavirus is that it belongs to the phylogenetic family called Coronaviridae. That's all it means. Just like you say, the genus of a dog is Canis lupus. That's a wolf, sorry. Canis canis, it's a dog. There are hundreds of dogs out there. Labs, German Shepherds, my mom's Chihuahua. Those are all Canis canis. Those are all the same type of genus and species. Same with coronaviruses. The same type of virus that gives you the sniffles and you're just thinking, I got a head cold, I shouldn't. It's really annoying. Can also be the one that you get sick with and you're at home for 3 weeks because those symptoms are really rough. So quickly, a brief history of coronavirus. When it first was found in Wuhan, China last year in December, they had to refer to it as Novel Coronavirus 2019, NCOV-19. N for novel, CO for corona, V for virus, 19 for 2019. From there, they needed to rename it so that we wouldn't call it a novel virus forever. So they renamed it temporarily as COVID-19, coronavirus disease found in 2019. More information has been found. They've been doing more research on it. They found that it is actually very similar to SARS. So now they're calling it SARS-CoV-2, basically SARS 2.0. It's really what it is. It's a new type of SARS virus that's out there. In January, we found that it is able to pass from human to human. The original idea was that it was animal to human or food to human. You know, they think the reservoir is a bat, hasn't been confirmed yet. And then in February, there's been a lot of spread. because it's so new, because symptoms can be so mild, that we had to start setting up global quarantine and isolation. If you're coming in from China or another endemic country, they will move you over to one of the ports of entry where they can isolate you for those 14 days. I am roasting. And then now in March, we have widespread local transmission here in the United States. You may have heard of the case in New York, Westchester, New York. That one case that came home in Westchester last week has now caused 9. As of this morning, 9 people caught coronavirus from that one person coming back from Italy.
You see the one in New Hampshire right now?
And then there's one in New Hampshire as of this morning. I know David.
That guy in New Hampshire was told to stick to quarantine, yet he went to an event.
He went all over the place.
Yes, so I'll get to those answers about isolation and quarantine. So why is it spreading so fast? Well, in general, infectious diseases are based on a basic reproduction number, which means that for every one person that gets an infectious disease, an R naught, that R 0, means that for every one person, these X amount of people will be getting it from you. So really quick, measles, the most virulent disease we've ever seen in humanity, has an R naught of 12 to 18 people. So for every person who is susceptible, remember what I said about susceptible populations? If you have measles, you can pass it to 18 to 12 other susceptible people in the course of your own infectious period. You start coming down, you'll start hearing diseases that we may have all had vaccines about, and this is why, because it's so important. Measles, diphtheria, smallpox, polio, rubella, and mumps. Your MMR, the polio vaccine. We don't have smallpox in the United States right now, but there is a vaccine available for it. Yeah. And diphtheria, if you've ever heard of the Tdap vaccine, this is why. It is the most virulent diseases out there that we know of. The new COVID-19 hits about 1.4 to 3.8. The reason that spread is so big is because we don't know enough about the virus yet. That number can go up, that number can go down. But the most important part to remember about an R naught, if anyone ever mentions it to you, is if it is below 1, that means it'll eventually peter out. It doesn't infect enough people to sustain in a population. If it is above 1, we're going to be seeing it forever, unless you have some sort of a vaccine against it. Vaccines are being worked on right now. So if you see how it is comparable to SARS, the original SARS strain, it spreads almost in exactly the same way. The problem is we didn't know it was out there. 80% of all the cases are very mild. People don't know they have it. So they're going out there thinking they just have the sniffles, they have the cold. And how many people know of Typhoid Mary? Is the same exact situation. People don't always know they have it. So that's why it's so important. So how do we stop it? Well, one of the things that I love about public health, that everyone else hates about public health, is the jargon. The same words that sound normal for everyone else and sound exactly the same for everyone else is not the same thing by definition. For example, cleaning, sanitizing, disinfection, and sterilization. They are not the same thing. People would call this table clean, but I wouldn't eat off it. So what's really important is cleaning is simply just clearing the area of the food that the microorganism feeds on. And then you move on to sanitizing, where you're killing off the germs that are on there to a level that is most likely not going to get you sick. You'll hear Clorox and now these things saying, kills 99.9% of all the germs. And actually here it even says it kills coronavirus. Well, here's the most important part of it. When you start talking about killing off those viruses, you need to talk about disinfection and sterilization. When you're disinfecting something, you are killing off a target organism. I'm killing off just E. coli. When you're doing sterilizing, you're killing off everything. That's when you get surgical instruments thrown into an autoclave, things like that. Sterilization is incredibly important in a surgical setting. Sean, I'll get to your question in just a second. So another part that's important to realize is we said organisms, not just anything. I mean, not just viruses. Sterilization is a word that is used for all organisms. So when when somebody is saying, we are sterilizing this plot of land, in normal conversation, normal jargon, all it means is we're killing off the rats, things like that. No, that is most likely disinfection. You can use disinfection on something like a rat. You can use that word. Technically, we use it in public health. Sterilization means everything. Nothing survives on that surface. Well, how many of you actually think that you properly disinfect your surfaces at home?
No way.
Exactly. First things first, always read the instructions when you have your wipes, your Lysol sprays, anything like that. On the back, it'll say, to disinfect. On the other side, it'll say, to sanitize. So, how many of you actually pay attention to this? To sanitize, use enough wipes to keep the treated surface visibly wet for 30 seconds. That's about right. You wipe it down, that's not an issue. To disinfect, kill off 100% of the targeted organism. Use enough wipes for the treated surface to remain visibly wet for 4 minutes.
Take all day.
How many of you, when you're wiping down your bathroom and you're cleaning your bathroom, how many of you have kids that you tell, go clean the bathroom, that they actually wipe down the bathroom and they sit there and wait? It's dry, wipe it down, let me wait for 4 minutes. That's not gonna happen. Most of the time, that's not the way things are done. And then, isolation and quarantine, those are legal terms. We use them, a lot of people use them interchangeably, but in public health, there needs to have a legal mandate to enforce isolation and quarantine. And that legal mandate comes from a declaration of emergency by the governor or the president. Regardless of what you think about politics, I don't expect a legal mandate anytime soon. Isolation means for a person who has the illness, you isolate them away from the population. You tell them to stay home. You order through Uber Eats on Nantucket, you know how we all love that, Ack Eats. You don't go out into the general population. Quarantine is for somebody who has been exposed. So if Taylor has coronavirus, we tell her to stay home. She gets stuck home for the next 14 days or until symptoms subside. The rest of you have fun staying at home for the next 14 days as well, but only if there is a legal mandate. Other than that, it is voluntary. So the person in New Hampshire, they told them, stay home. They didn't put a police officer in front of that person's door because they legally could not. There was no legal mandate given by the president to allow for isolation and quarantine procedures. The only legal mandate that we have to allow isolation and quarantine is at the airports and at the ports of entry from other countries. That's why you're hearing stories of this person from Westchester got into a taxi and got 9 people sick. This person from New Hampshire went to a party. Now God knows how many people that person got sick. That's why. Those are 2 legal definitions. So, how do we stop the spread? Because it's going to spread. Not anything to panic. Just because it's spreading doesn't mean you have to panic. This is a virus that causes flu-like symptoms, and it even causes incredibly mild symptoms in the majority of the population. 5 people here get sick. 4 of you may not even have it. And that one other person, that last 20%, may only feel mild flu-like symptoms. And then of the people who get sick, about 10% of them. So now we're talking about in a room of 100 people, 20 of them start showing symptoms. Of those 20, only 10 end up in the hospital because they have severe complications. It is something that you don't have to panic about. You just have to pay attention to the prevention techniques. Like I said, prevention starts with you. The guidelines that you'll get from the federal government come from one specific agency, the Centers for Disease Control. They control all of the public health policy in the United States. So, and what they're explaining is, first and foremost, keep your areas clean, including at home. And it's all infectious diseases. This is something to live by. It's not just now in coronavirus. You go out to Stop and Shop and you see the line of soaps being removed. Antibacterial soaps. Quick piece of trivia, doesn't exist. All soaps remove bacteria. Doesn't have to be an antibacterial soap. No Dial is gonna work better than Irish Spring. They're all doing the same thing. But you see that you see those shelves that are completely empty, and you just think to yourself, why weren't these people washing their hands in the first place? That's one of the most important parts. 2, sanitize your workspace. Read the back. The one I read out was the Clorox wipes, but you may have Lysol, you may have a generic brand, you may have anything else. All of them have different instructions because they all use different chemicals. Some use bleach, some use quaternary ammonium, others use hopes and dreams. It's all things like that.
If I may also, read the package to see how you're supposed to use it in regards to your own protection too.
Correct.
We have wipes that we use on the trucks that you have to wear gloves for.
Yes. The higher the concentration, what you use in commercial settings will burn you if you're not using gloves because that's such a high concentration of chemical. And then third, it's always important to understand that disinfection and sterilization isn't always possible. You know, like I said, you have kids that you tell to clean the bathroom, clean the kitchen. They may not always pay attention to everything you're telling them to do. I know I didn't when I was a kid. I don't expect anyone in today's world to expect to do the same thing. It's just really important to at least try. At least try. Get to the level of sanitization as much as possible. That 30 seconds, much more feasible. So, like I said, prevention starts with you. How many of you actually wash your hands for 20 seconds every single time with warm water and soap? How many of you actually do it properly? So, what's the most important part about soap? Is it's mechanical. You can't just put the soap on the dispenser, go right under the water, and start washing. Because soap has to have those bubbles. Those bubbles create things called micelles, M-I-C-E-L-L-E. A micelle is a kind of a jail cell that traps up dirt, bacteria, viruses. So what you do is you wet your hands, put on the soap, suds the soap up. Make sure you get between your fingers, under your fingernails. If you bite your nails like I do, that's pretty disgusting. It's gonna end up. There's like what's under your nails is really gross. You'd be really surprised what's in there. And then here's the other part that's important. When you finish washing your hands and you finally rinse it all off, don't just grab this.
No.
This has more bacteria on it than your hands do. And you're putting it up to your face. That's where these come in handy. That's where you sanitize, sterilize, disinfect, do what you can. Don't put your phone in the oven. It doesn't go well in the oven, it doesn't go well in the microwave. But you can sanitize them in other ways.
I've seen at hospitals UVC sanitizers for phones.
You can use UV sanitizing. UV does work. UV does kill off bacteria, it does kill off viruses. However, if you're not paying attention to the procedures, when they tell you leave it under for 5 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever survives is now resistant to that UV light. That's how antibiotic resistance works. Whatever survives is what proliferates. You're creating what's called a bottleneck event. Everything passes through the bottleneck. Everything that gets killed off on the bottom obviously is susceptible to that antibiotic. Whatever comes through, that survives and that proliferates. That's what repopulates the area. And that's how you end up with antibiotic resistant bacteria.
Is that true with wipes too?
It's true with every single type of antibiotic. Luckily, the reason bleach and quaternary ammonium are so effective is because no known bacteria or virus is known to survive it yet. Because chlorine is an elemental gas, it's a nonmetal. Chlorine is poisonous to any carbon source, a carbon-based organism. So that's one of the things that's really important, why we use quaternary ammonium and chlorine.
Is that why chlorine is in pools?
Exactly. Quick tidbit of trivia. If you smell the chlorine in a pool, that pool is not working correctly.
Really?
You're not supposed to smell the chlorine. What you're smelling is chloramide, which is combined chlorine. Means it's already reacted to the 5th grader who peed in the pool. That's what you're smelling. That's what you're smelling. Free chlorine is what's supposed to be in the water. Andrea, I bet you didn't expect this was going to be so dirty. So
My daughter has swimming right now.
we trust Jen.
Do you smell the chlorine in the pool?
And the towels smell like chlorine. I'm like, get into the water.
Yeah. There's always enough free chlorine in the water to still kill off bacteria. But usually when there is a closed pool like the one we have here on the island, when it's indoors, you smell it a lot more because you're concentrating the off-gassing. But you're not supposed to be smelling it. It's not supposed to be a strong scent. You'll always smell a little bit of it, but it's not supposed to be a strong scent. If you go in there and it's one of those, wow, something's not right, you get out of the water and your eyes are all red and puffy, that's not good.
Your skin's burning.
Exactly. So what if a case is found here? Well, isolation and quarantine procedures will be taken over by the state. So the State Department of Public Health has been in contact with us via conference call, via direct phone calls, via email, and they have explicitly stated that they will take over the isolation and the quarantine because they're the authorized agency. So if a person gets sent home and is forced, legally mandated to isolate, they will have a visiting nurse come down from Boston and deal with that person directly. And if in the situation that they need to be transported to the hospital or to another hospital, they handle that transport. So you don't have to worry about our firefighters and our paramedics being exposed due to somebody that's already under mandated isolation. All these procedures are really, I'll get them to you in just a second. Just a few more slides. No, they're not as disgusting. So, the interrupting the chain of transmission is the most important part. That's why isolation and quarantine is so important. We don't want you to get more people sick. If you remember, the R0 coronavirus was 1.4 to 3.8. We don't want you to get those 3.8 other people. What a 0.8 of a person is, I'm not exactly sure. But we don't want you to get those people sick. Stay calm, like I've said before, and tell people. Most people don't even know they have it. It's not something to panic about. With everything that is bare at Stop and Shop and at Alan Bell's stores and at Dan's stores, people are panicking. You don't have to panic. It is important to just take care of your symptoms. Just like flu, just like common cold, just like most upper respiratory illnesses. If you take care of the symptoms, you are taking care of yourself. So it's important to pay attention to fever reducers and expectorants. So if you are going to panic and go to Stop and Shop and buy a bunch of stuff that you might not necessarily need, the two things you should be buying is Tylenol, which is a fever reducer, acetaminophen, which is the active ingredient, you can get the generic. It's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. And you can get an expectorant, which is like Robitussin or Mucinex, something that'll keep the things from entering your lungs. It'll induce some coughing, it'll induce something so you can clear out your lungs, but that's the most important part. You don't want it to become bronchitis, which then turns into pneumonia. Pneumonia is what kills people. That's why you hear about the 3% mortality rate. The reason it's a 3% mortality rate is because people didn't know they had it. So they let it continue. They ended up at the hospital, all at the same time. Imagine 10,000 people showing up to one hospital once the alert came out. People got overwhelmed. They couldn't take care of the people that were there. They ended up getting a more severe symptom, and that's how the people ended up dying. We expect that mortality rate to start dropping. And if you look at something, here's the fun jargon part. In epidemiology, we start talking about mortality rates. The 3% is the crude mortality rate. That's what we're seeing in the entire population. Everyone, 3%. That includes people who have immunocompromised, people who have COPD, people who are 116 years old. That includes all of them. When you start getting what's called a stratified review, people from the ages of 0 to 5, people from the ages of 6 to 10, and you start paying attention to those groups, that's when you start seeing that children, they're not really getting that sick. They're not getting as sick as most people are. This is mostly an adult illness. And then on top of that, bless you, and then on top of that, you will start seeing that all the deaths are in that upper 30% of the population. People who already had some sort of a pre-existing condition. It's usually where the deaths are concentrated. And when we stratify out the mortality rate, that's when you start getting what's called a standardized mortality rate. That's what you hear about when you talk about HIV, you talk about measles, mumps, rubella, Ebola. That's the standardized mortality rate. How many people die per 100,000 people infected? That's the number we're waiting for. That's the number we should pay attention to.
Question?
Yes, sir.
When the president said last night that his gut feeling was that the mortality rate was under 1%, I went to the Johns Hopkins site at the same time yesterday, and there were 127 cases in the US confirmed and 11 deaths, which is 8.66%.
Mm-hmm.
Where is it for real?
The 9 deaths that have happened in Washington state were all in a nursing facility. That's a major susceptible population. We're expecting 9 deaths in people in immunocompromised situations. That is not necessarily out of the norm for a coronavirus. People die the same way from flu. You have a flu outbreak in a nursing facility, it can be just as lethal, if not more. I wouldn't necessarily always respond to the president's gut feelings, though. But I would pay attention to what the CDC and the World Health Organization has to say. Is it below 1%? In a large-scale response in the United States, possibly. Globally, where they don't have a public health infrastructure like in the United States, it might be higher. And that's unfortunately just the way it is. And with most people not knowing they're spreading it, you're going to see that out in the U.S. Outside of the U.S., you're going to see higher numbers of mortality. But that's why it's so important not to panic and pay attention to your symptoms. So, if we have cases here, if a person is sick, that's when you wear the mask. You put the mask on now, you're just wasting your money and everyone else's money. And you're also just taking away a mask from somebody who might actually need it. Once the person is sick, the sick person wears the mask, and then the person taking care of the sick person wears the mask. Nobody else needs to wear that mask. It's not going to help you. And
How long is a mask good for?
And then when you're wearing a normal mask, that little mask that you're seeing in front of the hospital, the one that just goes over your ears and doesn't really make a seal, those masks are never worth it. So the people who are going to the hospital stealing the masks from the hospital, shame on you, 1. And then 2, it's not helping you. The mask that you want is the N95. NIOSH, NIOSH, National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. The N95 mask, it filters out 95% of all the particulate matters in the air. That's the mask that people need to do. You need to be clean shaven, you need to put it on your face, it needs to seal around all your respiratory areas. That thing is only good for 4 hours. So as soon as you expose it to air, as soon as you open up that bag and you put it on, 4 hours. That's it. That's why people who are putting on their masks now and they're getting onto the steamship, they're getting into Boston, they're doing the whole thing, they've probably been wearing that same mask all day. They're more likely to get it because once you start exposing it, those cartridges start absorbing everything that's coming through it. It starts collecting in that filter. Once that filter is saturated, it's no good. If you continue to breathe through a saturated filter, you're concentrating the virus in your lungs. It's worse for you. Wear the masks only if you're caring for a sick person or for a person who is already sick. And then you take it off, you throw it away, and you wash your hands. You don't have access to a sink? These automatic dispensers give you the amount of alcohol-based Purell that you need. Make sure it makes contact with your skin for at least 20 seconds. 20 minutes, yeah, by accident. 20 minutes would be nice. 20 seconds. Keep rubbing it around. Get in between your fingers, under your nails. And then, wipe down your phone. The phone is incredibly dangerous. You're more likely to get sick from a foodborne illness from your phone than you are from getting coronavirus right now. Pay attention to how much you're cleaning. The phone is a filthy instrument. And if the outbreak starts getting worse, do not just show up to any hospital. Call. If you show up to an emergency room and you're actively sick and you're actively coughing, it's the most selfish thing you can do. Because you show up to the Nantucket Cottage Hospital's emergency room and you're coughing all over the place, you have now shut the emergency room down until they can sanitize, disinfect, and sterilize the entire room before the next person can come in. Call them so that they can put you in through the separate entrance. They have a separate isolation and quarantine entrance for this exact reason. They can put you in. It's a negative pressure room so that the air doesn't circulate around the hospital, and they will be able to isolate you from everyone else. Call ahead, call your primary care physician. And if it continues to get worse, then you start hearing mandates for social distancing. Cancel town meeting, cancel the Mariah Mitchell's science program that's happening in a few weeks, that sort of thing. Cancel hockey games, soccer games, things like that. That's social distancing. That's a kind of extreme. But if it gets to that point, you'll hear it. We'll most likely start using reverse 911s to get information out to people. And then 2 more slides. Next steps. We will continue to monitor the outbreak as needed. If you want more information for yourselves, go to the Centers for Disease Control website, cdc.gov. If you don't believe our own federal government, go to the World Health Organization website, who.int. They are an independent, non-governmental body, part of the United Nations, specifically tasked to deal with outbreaks on a global scale. And if you don't trust either of them, go to nantucket-ma.gov, because you can trust us. But I steal all my information from them. And then lastly, a quiz. What takes 20 seconds is the most important part of prevention. Washing your hands. Okay, who's first person to raise your hand?
Scrubbing bubbles.
Thank you, Seth. Here you go. Some wipes for you. What do SARS, MERS, CoV, and the common cold all have in common? Charity. They're all coronaviruses. You get Kleenex, and they're antiviral too. How is COVID-19 spread?
Rockets.
Airdrop, yeah, airborne. Which one do you prefer, wipes or Kleenex?
Airborne.
Maybe wipes.
Are you going to pay attention to the instructions?
Yes.
And then lastly, for the last box of Kleenex, who is the federal agency responsible for our outbreak responses? CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. And with that, any questions? I know there's a lot of questions and it's more important. I know Sean had questions, Charity had questions. I know Enoch, you have some questions as well. So we'll go Sean, Charity, Enoch.
I had a question. I had two questions actually. First one was I saw disinfection, sterilization. What do you have for let's say like UV disinfection? What would that be considered?
Like UV disinfection, when would we start using that?
What would you use? How would you like what terminology would you use? Because when we talk about it, it's usually, I believe it's sterilization, and it's not really killing the bacteria.
Yeah.
It's mutating their DNA so they can't reproduce.
So that they can't reproduce, exactly. So that's more or less disinfection because you're targeting specific bacteria that are on the surface. And it's not 100% guaranteed that it'll get everything.
Yeah.
So that's why it'll end up most likely being disinfection because that mutation in their DNA, you're absolutely correct on how that works. The mutation in their DNA might actually lead them to be stronger.
Yeah, well, there's also reactivation, I believe, where if it is exposed again to UV, it could actually reverse what it's done, so it could actually
Absolutely correct.
reproduce again.
Absolutely. See, this is why we have to trust our wastewater people as well. Excellent, Sean. Because he's absolutely right. You can reactivate the bacteria through UV reactivation sequences.
It's pretty effective, though.
It is very effective. It does kill that 99.999%. But you can never actually guarantee that you got all of it unless you've done full sterilization techniques. Something like heat. When you heat sanitize something, no infectious bacteria or virus can survive a full heat sterilization. And that's like you see in surgeries where you put it in an autoclave and it reaches something like 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Like nothing can really survive that. Sometimes it's even more.
Second question was on quarantine.
Yes.
I know a lot of people are infectious even before they start showing symptoms. So it's hard to really pre-quarantine people. But
Correct.
For example, how long? From what I've read, it's 48 hours from the last symptom that you had, and then you're no longer able to spread the disease, or is that? And that varies from person to person, and how long their symptoms last, I assume.
Yes. So you leave isolation after 48 hours of the last symptom shown. That's the recommendation so far. It can change. The more knowledge we have about the virus, the more specific guidelines we'd be able to give. Those are the guidelines that we use for SARS, the original SARS outbreak, and it seems to be working so far. The case that was in Boston, they released him back to school. 2 days, he went back to school 2 days after his last symptom, and there's been no more cases based on him. So, yes, the general idea is you quarantine for 14 days because people tend to show symptoms between 2 and 14 days. It's usually, if you look at the epidemic curve, it's around 7 to 9 days is when people typically start showing symptoms. But some people are showing as early as 48 hours after exposure. And then 48 hours or so after the last symptom is when you can start going back out into the
For
general.
symptoms you're considering like fever or something like that?
Any of the symptoms, coughs, fever, headache, malaise, whole thing. I know Charity Enoch and Mark, because you had a question as well.
Yes, I just wanted some clarification on the slide where it was talking about if a case is found on the island, what the next steps are. Automatically, the Department of Public Health is brought in and legally mandate that people are quarantined.
So if we have a case on the island, a single case, most likely what they'll do is they'll get a public health nurse down here from the Department of Public Health, a state Department of Public Health, and that person will have them isolate in their home. That nurse will continue to give them daily visits to make sure that the symptoms aren't getting worse, that they haven't spread it. If it even spreads within the household, that's also, as terrible as it sounds, if it spreads within the household, that's also okay because it's not getting out to the general population. That nurse will take care of those responses. And that's if we have a single case that's not part of a much larger outbreak.
Is that still voluntary?
That is still voluntary. If that person breaks isolation, if the person purposely says, I'm not going to pay attention, anything like that, we can ask the governor to give us that legal authority to mandate it. And Charlie Baker gave a talk 2 days ago or yesterday, I don't remember which one it was, where he said that he would issue that order in a situation where people are voluntarily breaking isolation and quarantine. I don't know, Enoch and then Mark. I know you had a question earlier.
We did some research in IT and found out that besides cell phones, keyboards are actually the germiest object in any office.
Oh, yeah.
And I go around from office to office touching keyboards and mice all day long.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the things where I said prevention starts with you.
We did find a UVC keyboard sterilizer,
Yes.
but is that dangerous to use? I mean, could we create a super bug?
There's a possibility. It is incredibly minute of a risk. UV is still considered one of the best sterilization techniques out there.
Because we can't 4 minutes wiping a keyboard.
Exactly. If you have UV sterilization equipment and you're not exposing yourself to it purposely, definitely use it. We're not telling you not to use it. We're just saying that is not always 100% effective.
And then I went in, we have 3 in our family, so I went into Marine to buy 3 N95 masks. Got the last pack on the shelf. Was told that some lady came in and bought $2,000, $3,000 worth of masks prior to that. Wiped the whole supply out. Is there anything the town can do to recover some of that?
No, it's free market. There's nothing we can do to stop that. That's why it's important to pay attention to panic. Panic is the worst thing people can do. There's nothing we can do to recover it. And chances are, if it was, if now is the time, if you have 10,000 N95 masks at home, now is the time to give them away, Mark. You don't sell them at a gouged price.
$1,900.
Yes. So I know.
I was working on the keyboard of the nursing director at OIH. They have, for the whole facility, just one mask. Do we have masks for OIH?
They have masks. The one thing that we're talking about is most likely a PAPR, positive airflow. And I forgot what the PR stands. The P stands for. The R is respirator. Powered air, positive air respiration. Thank you. Yeah, most likely it's just the one PAPR. They have masks.
I asked Heather, she said no.
It's a nursing
She said
facility.
she ordered them and they're back ordered.
Well, they're back ordered, but they have masks as a nursing facility. N95s might be different.
Yeah, they don't have.
They may not have N95s, but they
you
definitely
mentioned
have.
N95 is the crucial one.
Yeah, they may have nurses. It is a nursing
Does the
facility.
Department of Public Health have a supply of them?
No, they do not.
What?
The Department of Public Health will not be providing us with masks in the case of an outbreak. That's just, they have to keep it for the people taking care of the sick. Mark,
So if you could go over the sort of the procedures of if you're experiencing flu-like symptoms or cold? I mean, because you don't really know. Like I said, you don't know if you have it.
Yes.
And if you do start to have symptoms, you don't really know how severe they're going to be. And this is flu season still, so a lot of people are having other maladies that aren't related to this at all and may be confused. So you mentioned something about don't go to the hospital.
Yeah.
Which is contrary to what you might normally do if you don't have coronavirus, or should do, or go to the doctor's office.
Even the hospital is putting out literature. There's some literature that we have a joint statement where it specifically says call ahead. Doesn't necessarily most likely they will, if it's a mild symptom, if it's something you can control, they'll tell you don't come in. If it's something that's becoming pretty severe, you're worried about bronchitis, when they put the stethoscope into your lungs, you hear something called, the term is called popping bacon, where you'll know the feeling if you've ever had bronchitis, where you're breathing and it feels like there's little bubbles in your lungs. That's when you call ahead so that they can prepare for you to get there. It's not necessarily to never go, but they need to prepare that you're coming, so they can get you in through that isolation room so that you're not accidentally contaminating the main entrance, the primary care facility, or the emergency room. But in the meantime, for work, it is very important to pay attention to if you're a union worker, make sure you pay attention to your contract. If you're a non-union worker, we have a policy on sick leave and things like that, and how to use that, just to make sure that you're paying attention to it correctly. In the event that you are isolated or quarantined, you are covered by FMLA, and you are in that sort of situation, but it's up to certain people's employers. We're all town employees here, but I know they're recording this. That's going to be put on NCTV's website for people who are watching at home. Talk about your sick leave policy with your employer, because a lot of people just can't afford to not have people work. And a lot of times, if it's a small job, if it's like a 1 or 2 person shop, they may choose to close instead. So it is something that you definitely need to talk with your supervisor about, your sick leave. And if you have a human resources department, sorry, Amanda, talk to your human resources department about your sick leave policy as well.
Try one more. I've had some questions about travel, particularly to countries being reported that maybe there's outbreaks. So it's hard to determine, the significance or the growth of this sort of phenomena in particular countries, because every day it is changing. Is there any kind of, recommendation? I know it's kind of hard to say, like, don't travel or travel, but if you are deciding to travel, let's say you really need to, other than what you've said here, habits, is there something else you might pay attention to?
So this is definitely an overview. This is by no means a full comprehensive list. We have some information on the table there about how to prevent spread and things. But I don't know if I have the travel recommendation on here, but we do have there is a travel recommendation out by the CDC. You go to the cdc.gov website. The very top banner is coronavirus. Click where it says learn more. And on the right, it says if you're traveling or traveling advice. Click on that. You can even go by countries. They even have specific travel guidelines for specific countries. That is very important, and it's an excellent point and an excellent question. Yes, Sean.
Just one quick question about, so with the symptoms possibly lasting 2 weeks or so, I know a lot of people, they'll only be really, really sick for maybe 2-3 days, and then it lingers on for a week or so. If they choose to come back, should we recommend that they wear a mask?
They should be wearing a mask.
If they still have a cough.
For as long as they have the illness, they need to be wearing a mask.
If they choose to come back to work.
Especially if they choose to come back.
Because I know a lot of departments, like you were saying, they can't be out. They don't feel like they can afford to be out for 2 weeks at a time.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you. And we're always available. And please feel free to contact me as needed, and in the front desk. And if you have any more specific questions, ask Taylor.
Oh, just want to say one last thing.
Yes, Mark.
We didn't have the carpet cleaned in here last week, so